Welcome to For the Love of Books, Bees Books Edition, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries.
Hello, this is Pari.
And this is Jenny, and we're here to talk about
Bees Books. Well, both of us today are a bit coffee.
We are indeed, yes.
So there might be exciting sound effects. Hopefully brief and not like they've lasted for me for like a good 5 minutes.
No, exactly. Yeah.
That wouldn't make a fun podcast. No. You've heard of ASMR. We spoke about ASMR at some point. I feel like some weeks ago, unless it was a fever dream.
Okay.
Have we not? It's like noises that like people watch videos where there are noises like things like that and like drinking water and stuff. Coughing would be a terrible ASMR.
No, that's not going to help you do anything, is it?
Maybe if it's like a nice genteel cough.
Is there such a thing? No, even that was, no.
But mine is not that.
No, neither is mine.
No.
It's more kind of...
Oh, mine sounds like I'm possessed by a witch. Or I am. So...
I'd like to reassure everybody that neither of us are possessed as far as we know.
Yeah, we wouldn't know if we were possessed.
No, I suppose we wouldn't.
So maybe we are possessed.
We'll just hope they're asleep when we do the podcast.
Yes, I don't know actually. Okay, this possession talk is taking a bit out, especially because the last time when the theme was announced, the theme that Bee's given us is knock knock. And my thoughts had immediately gone to horror.
Mm-hmm.
I have not bought any horror books with me, but maybe this was my possession, my demon speaking. But yes, anyway.
Yes.
What are the books that you have?
So I have two. And I am going to squeeze them into knock knock because I wanted to talk about them. I know Bee gets angry with us when we do that. However, so the first one is There Will Be Bodies by the wonderful Lindsay Davis. It's a crime book and it's set in Rome or Roman times, ancient Roman times. But unlike the Simon Scarrow books I've talked about before, this is more kind of modernly written, if that's a word. It's kind of, it is absolutely Roman, but it's more of a kind of private detective kind of person.
So what era? Like ancient?
So it is ancient, and of course there is no year on this.
BC,
AD. Well, in this book, Vesuvius has just exploded, and so it's 10 years after that.
I wish I knew.
Yes, I wish I knew as well. And as usual, no research
times.
Olden times, yes, olden times.
Yes. And how are you fitting it into knock knock?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
My second book is Marble Hall Murders by Anthony Horowitz, another wonderful author. And I'm fitting this in because it's the size of a doorstop.
Oh.
Yes. It is a big chunky book.
Yes, it is.
But those are my two offerings.
And there's also a key in the cover that a bird is holding.
Yes, and it could be a key to a door.
It's all door related.
Yes, I'm not sure why there's a key actually. Come back to the story, but never mind.
That's good.
Yes.
So my first book is something a co-worker lent me, but we also have our own copy. It's called Buddha Da by Anne Donovan, and I think she's a Glaswegian writer. She must be, because the whole book is written in Glaswegian, which you seem to know this book. You're not
Working in libraries, it's a it's always been one of those books that we always get asked about.
Right.
We have to buy it in quite often because it's very much asked for. I've not read it though. So
I had literally never heard of it until a co-worker, she read it and she's like, you have to read this book, and then she bought me her own personal copy to give me.
It's a lovely copy.
And it's very nice, and I tried to take care of it, but now I'm getting a bit paranoid. But anyway, so in how I'm fitting this into knock knock is that in the first, I think, chapter, very much at the start of the book, there are these Tibetan, monks. They're not Tibetan, they live in Scottish Tibetan monks, I guess, who are looking for a baby who has, based on their calculations or whatever it is that they do. So it's not the Dalai Lama's incarnation. He's the big head honcho in the Buddhist world. Buddhist monks, sorry, not Tibetan monks. They have found that based on their calculations, there is a place in or near Glasgow called Carmanach, I want to say. Is it Carmanach? Yes, Karmanak. Yes, I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation. But of all places, that's where they think the new Lama, not the Dalai Lama, but one of the big people, has been born. So they just like decide to head on over with the titular Buddhada. So he decides to take them because he's like Glaswegian. So they think that it might be better to like have a local rather than like these rando to break the news to these parents that your child is the chosen one. So they knock into the door and go and meet the baby. So that's how I have fit it in. And my second book is called Reading Lessons by Carol Atherton. And it is, so the subtitle is basically what it is. The books we read at school, the conversations they spark, and why they matter.
It's a beautiful cover.
It's a fantastic book. I just love this book. This is a book that, much like you, I wanted to talk about and try to squeeze in. It's so nice. But basically, Carol is an English teacher, secondary English or whatever it's called, GCSEs in England. Sorry about that. ASMR. She is basically she's written essays about I want to say like a fair few, say a dozen or more books that are either recommended or are on the list of the GCSEs. Which sounds like a really like boring kind of book, like who cares? Especially because these books usually kind of have the stigma of, if you learn them in school, you're not really loving them. But she's really passionate about these books. She's passionate about books and English and just like reading and stuff. So she has written like about how she makes these old books relevant to her students, and like the kinds of themes and stuff that we're talking about today, even though they were not necessary. Maybe some of them were dealing with those themes, but she shines a light on specific themes through her specific interpretations and the kinds of conversations she opens up for her students. So I feel like in this, my knock is knocking the assumptions out of your head about not just the books, but about teenagers as well. Because everyone has a specific idea of teenagers, especially if you don't work with them a lot. We're like all like, scared of them or like have these preconceived notions. But she writes about some of the conversations that she has in schools and classrooms and about how much they have, how much insight they have, how much things matter to them, even if they're like pretending that it doesn't because it's not cool and stuff. But the kinds of things they come up with, the kinds of readings, interpretations based on their real world observations and stuff, and add so much to the book and the conversation. So knocking the assumptions out of her head.
I'm interested, can you give us at least one title of
well, To Kill a Mockingbird is one. And again, so she grew up reading this book, and I read this book when I was really young and I loved it. Well, I was young and I really loved it. There's different, more nuanced conversations about the book now, because it talks about how it's very much like focused on the white characters rather than it's supposed to be about the black characters and the miscarriage of justice and stuff. But it's still a really good book. So she's trying to bring that tension together, and she's like, I want to talk about the contemporary sort of issues. So she brings in other writers and stuff, but she also talks about how the book was so important at the time and even now, and discussing it and having all these different perspectives is a way to sort of expand the conversation. And there's Shakespeare and stuff as well, which again, Shakespeare, you feel like depending on the kind of relationship you had, it can be so like static. Any of these texts actually can be so static, but she brings them alive through her reading. So
she's the kind of person you want as your English teacher at school.
Absolutely. Especially because some of these books, like I don't know if Scotland has a very different kind of thing, but basically in her sort of syllabus, it's like supposed to be a book that's before like during Victorian times or whatever that, then something that's modern, but modern is defined as after 1930 or something like, so it's not like even like modern and like poetry and drama. So there is a lot of scope for expanding it, but she also talks a lot about the kinds of challenges that teachers have, because like you don't have time, so you're going to like stick to the tried and tested,
Yeah.
especially if you have to have like buy a whole list of new books. So you tend to stick to the same. And as much as she tries to expand it, she also thinks it's valuable to use these constraints that you have, but to use them to talk about things that are relevant to now and relevant to the students' lives, and to make it really matter to them. And she does it in such interesting ways. So even some of the themes that I'll just see from the kinds of like just the table of contents. So on loyalty, empathy, and social mobility, which is focusing on Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. On power, gender, and control, My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, which I've never heard of. So that was the really interesting thing as well. And there's Jane Eyre and stuff, and like Charlotte Bronte, and Noughts and Crosses, Mallory Blackman, but also some like really more obscure ones, at least for me. But she writes about the story, so it's like not a spoiler-free text, but she really like sort of interweaves the themes in it in such a like really impressive way. I think it's like being in an English lesson, but not. It's not a boring English lesson, like you say. It's something that you want to have had, and it's not too late. Like you can still like just read this book and see. So it's not just for teenagers, I would say, or not just for English teachers. It's for anybody who likes books and who wants to think differently about books, because obviously this is just her reading, and if we've read these books, we might have a different take on it.
Yeah.
But I like that she opens it up for her students' interpretations as well. So sometimes she struggles because she's like, oh, these students are because they have so many more new influences now, like TikTok and like, you know, like online, like social media and stuff. And some of them are not the best influences. Like they can be a bit misogynist, a bit racist. So how do you then open up that discussion, but also have that duty of care to students who might be women or who might be brown or black or East Asian or whatever? And she does it so sensitively. She also writes about her failures as well, like when it's not work. And she also interweaves her own, like when she was a student and when she was growing up, and the kinds of books that either mattered to her or didn't, and like how that worked. So it's a really interesting blend of like memoir and books and like talks and conversations and interpretations. Just a fantastic book.
And how did you come across this?
Library, just browsing.
Just browsing?
Yeah, I'd never heard about it. And I just, first of all, the cover, like, and like reading lessons again, like the thought of it might be to some people who don't have the best relationship with English or school, might be put off by it, especially like the books we read at school, the conversations they spark and why they matter. People who are like, I don't care, whatever. But for me, this was right up my alley, especially like I love the multiple interpretations of things. So I was browsing a library. We also we have an ebook of this in North Lanarkshire, and this is from Glasgow. But I like would direct if you want. This is a book I think that you want to keep on your shelf and like revisit at different times, much like she does, because she's been working as an English teacher for like few decades now, I think. And she keeps revisiting, and she's like, depending on the class and depending on where she is at that point, she's reading different things into the books, and the conversations are different. Like in one of the books, I forget which one, but she's in a Shakespeare, one of the Shakespeare plays, Macbeth. She is reading a lot of what's the word, when a mom can't have babies, like when a woman can't have babies, infertility. Because she went through that herself, and she's like, this reading is not like a popular or common reading with Lady Macbeth, because she's like supposed to be this villain and stuff. But she read that in her, she went and researched the actual Lady Macbeth as well. And because she was going through that, she read that into her book, and she opened up that conversation to her students, and they saw it differently. So that's like, I love these kinds of books. This is like totally up my street. But she also has such a strong voice that it never feels like it's too teachery, or, because a good teacher is like right. So it feels like it's just a guide through these books, and this is a book that I definitely would want to keep by myself, for myself, and like make annotations and notes and things. So,
Because you're awfully
yeah.
passionate about this. I'm not seeing you this passionate for a book in a while.
I loved it. It's just, it moved me so much, like because she writes like with passion, and she writes with a lot of like the kind of difficult things, but sometimes also joyful things, and so it's just such a good book.
Even just you talking about it has opened my eyes slightly to English teachers in general. You know, when you think of an English teacher, you do kind of think, well, I think of an old man with a pipe with sandals on who's slightly fed up with their job.
Oh no, is that the kind of English teacher?
No, I had a very good English teacher actually, I must say, Mr. Stewart. Hi. But that's the kind of, you know, and they're kind of slightly fed up. She sounds as if she loves her job.
Yeah.
And she's trying to do something different.
But I think that's what keeps that love going.
Yeah.
Because if you are going to be teaching the same book for like 10 years, 20 years or whatever, that enthusiasm can wane as much as you love the book. If we talked about the same book every episode, we get pretty fed up of it. Like, even when we've had to like re-record things, we're like, oh. Yeah. Whereas she, I think, through this, like, you know, constantly like being in conversation with the book and with the students. And like I said, the students, some of them are just so excellent. So there's GCSEs, and I think there's something after sixth form, I think, in England. So those are like slightly higher level, like readers, I guess, because they've chosen to choose like English A levels or whatever it is. So she has a smaller group, but she can have more complex conversations with them, and they're ready for it. You know, sometimes they really like, there were some like really brutal ones. There's a Toni Morrison book, As I Rise, I want to say, which writes about her really awful life, like her childhood. And the students say that like they were really depressed reading this, but they were glad they read it as well, because they feel like they bore witness to this kind of life and injustice that still keeps happening. But through the book, they were able to like learn about this. So it's a very sort of sensitive and thoughtful like relationship that the kids have, like teenagers have with the books as well. And she's really respectful of their, like, even if it's something she doesn't agree with, she's really like trying to treat them as, well, I don't want to say equals, but as someone who has
an interest,
a voice. Yeah. So which I think a good English teacher.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And she's been teaching for 20 years.
More than I think, yeah.
It must be interesting as well for her to think back on a class 20 years ago, and as you say, how they seen the exact same story as opposed to now. 20 years ago, completely different.
Absolutely.
The world was a completely different place. Just like when the book was written, it would have been a completely different place. And that's probably quite interesting as well.
For sure. Like, I'm sure if she wrote this book in another 20 years, she would choose different things, which I love. I love that like, it's not a finished text, even though you think this person has written this book might be long dead, but it's still like, and that's what I think she makes a really good justification for reading old books and for like including them in the curriculum, because it is like not just like sort of in the history of culture and things of British literature, but also how you can like both talk about the past and the present through this. It's alive.
And see, at the end of the day, a story is a story is a story, you know, and if it was written 100 years ago, it's written now, there's still a story behind it that can be relevant to any body, if you know what I mean. Gosh, you've made me want to read it, and that's unusual for a non-fiction book.
And it's like super, like I say, super accessible. She's such a good guide. This is what I love. These are the kinds of non-fiction books I love, because some can be like really dry or really like serious, and this is sort of serious. I don't mind serious books, but it's also very approachably serious. So yes, you should read this book.
Okay. You've talked me round. Well, I don't think I'm going to talk you around to reading this book, but I'm going to talk about.
Well, I love the cover. Yeah. And I love the idea of a historical murder mystery.
Yes. Two of my favourite things squished together. So as I say, the original, so Lindsay Davis has been writing for like 1,005 years, and started out, her main character was called Falco. And he was wonderful. I was slightly in love with Falco. And he kind of lived through certain, leaders of Rome, which are called emperors, I believe. And there's, although it's basically a murder mystery or a like kind of mystery at the heart, there was historical stuff going on at the same time, and he met some historical people, and there was kind of a woman who was quite posh, and they got married and all this kind of stuff. There's like a huge development. I can't even remember how many Falco books there are, but there was a point where obviously Falco was a bit old to be hitting the streets in the sandals. I think there's maybe, I'm going to say 25 on the Falco series. We've now got a new series, and it's his daughter that's kind of taken over. So he's now kind of retired. He's taken over his father's antique business. I'm doing an antique with what do you call it?
Eggwood?
Yes, because his father was slightly not dodgy, but the antiques trade, I think, has been the same throughout history, that if they have a very nice vase, they might have the same vase next week slightly smaller, because it's went to a back room and somebody's kind of that kind of a thing. It's all mostly above board. Mostly. But he does appear in the Flavia book. So this is Flavia Albia. They kind of adopted her on one of the adventures. They went to Britain, and she was an orphan. It was just after the revolution. And they kind of bought her back and adopted her. She's now a grown-up. She's been married. Her husband, I'm pretty sure her husband died. And she's kind of taken over where Falco's left off. But because she's a woman, she isn't treated quite the same way he is.
Shocking.
No. But also she gets interesting things that maybe wouldn't have come across Falco's, I was going to say desk. He never had a desk. Because they wouldn't approached a man with this problem, if you know what I mean. So I think this book is book number 12, maybe. In this series. Yeah, the very, very many books. And I absolutely love the Flavia books. I was reluctant at first because I was slightly in love with Falco, and really I just wanted them to keep going, but I could understand why they couldn't keep going. But I love Lindsay Davis's voice as well. If it could be set anywhere, it's got that kind of American Gumshoe kind of feel about it. The sentences and everything are quite short as well, so you fly through it. It's kind of written in that kind of tempo that things happen quite quickly.
So do people come to her, to Flavia?
Well, recently she just kind of like stumbles over things. A bit like Falco used to do. But she's married now to somebody who, so I'm not quite sure how this works, but in ancient Roman times, if you were from a good family or whatever, you would do like a year in, you would maybe be a year as a priest or a year as in the Senate or that kind of stuff. I don't quite know. She explains it very well. It's just I've got no memory for that kind of stuff. But her husband has just been an Adele, I think it's called. So in charge of like, it seems to be like the religious ceremonies, because how they liked like burning feathers and making big pronouncements. He was kind of in charge of that kind of thing, but you can only do it for a length of time. So now he's in charge of like building stuff. He seems to be like he has a building company. What is ancient Rome? And ancient Rome was like filled with things a bit like now, buildings that were thrown up in 5 minutes and last 20 years and then kind of fall apart and things like that. So he's kind of charged. He's a really good man. He's trying to do his best to kind of do stuff. He's also on her side, very much so. He knows that she's going to go off and get herself in danger. And although he's kind of like, it'd be lovely if he didn't, he knows that she's going to do it and is just there to kind of help, if you know what I mean. He never hinders her. He's also a really good sounding board for her. And the relationship's really good. So at first, when you first meet her, she doesn't know him. And she's on her own and it just kind of develops. So as I say, now we're book 12 or whatever we are. His uncle has bought a property near Pompeii, basically. It's 10 years after the thing. And we all know about Pompeii, we all know about, you know, what they're finding now, things like that. This is quite a few miles further away, so the buildings in that, you know, were affected by the heat and the dust and the things like that, but they're clean, they're cleanable. It's not like Pompeii was, that it was basically deserted because he couldn't do anything. So he's
Because
got
of the volcano,
yes,
was it Mount Vesuvius?
Vesuvius,
Yeah.
So because his nephew is in the building trade, he kind of sends him off to make this property habitable again. And the whole family goes, they take all their building people and they get to the property, and there's lots of, like, it's not dust or ash, it's kind of horrible stuff. But they're not expecting, well, they're not expecting that because it's been further away, so people had more time to evacuate,
Right.
and they could go the other way. I'm pointing as if anyone can see where I'm pointing to. So they're not expecting anything. But of course, the title of the book is There Will Be Bodies. There are bodies. They find bodies. But turns out, obviously, it wasn't the volcano that did for them, although it's been made to look like that. So she gets involved. She doesn't really have a client, usually it's a client, but because she's basically seen the bodies and, you know, there's a story behind the bodies, she gets involved. And it's just wonderfully done. Again, you see the history behind it, you know, it's 10 years after, so the land is still, you know, there's no greenery or anything.
Yeah.
You know, the land's still dead, it's not, you know, quite come back yet, although at the end of it, you know, you kind of see that things are starting to move. But what was interesting, and I know she does hundreds of research and things, I think she's a time traveller basically, and, you know, goes back. You can see how humans, animals and things, but humans especially, adapt and just go on with things. And there's always good humans that will go and try and rebuild, and there's bad humans that will take advantage of what's happened. So she meets a pirate. She meets all sorts of people, and some of them you think are good and they're actually bad, and vice versa. And it's just a wonderful series. You know, she's so likeable, Flavia. She's got her own crosses to bear. You know, she doesn't really remember what happens in Britain, but she's still got that hanging over her. People know she's not Roman, and although they're outside Rome, in this story, it's very much snobberish, if you know what I mean. You know, if you don't have the proper Roman accent because you're from out, you know, in the countryside, you're kind of slightly frowned on. And because although she's been in Rome for a long time, she's still got a slight Britishness about her. You know, there are some people that don't like that as well. But it's just a wonderful book. And it's,
but it also feels like what you were saying, the writer, you think she feels like a time traveler.
Absolutely.
I think that's such a skill in itself. Like, it might not all be true because obviously research is the basis, but then imagination is also
Absolutely.
taken. But then the fact that she takes you along with her on that imaginative leap, and it feels real enough to a lay reader that, you know, you feel like you're there at that time.
Absolutely.
And you can imagine stuff around you. I think
she's very not descriptive in a bad way, you know, that way you do actually feel as if you're in, you know, you're right there kind of a thing. And when she's talking about these, you know, because there's the pirates is a bit of a, you know, he's basically going to the buildings that have been deserted and stealing stuff and selling it on, all this. Again, you can absolutely see these things now. You know,
absolutely.
You know, it's very much spans everything. And it's just wonderful.
Well, I have 4 different knock options for you, since you didn't have. Well, one is, it doesn't apply in this book, I think, but what you were saying is that some people go to her like because she's a woman, and maybe so they are knocking to go to meet her, like knocking.
Thank you.
Second is her husband, her new husband, is like, knows that she'll get into danger and stuff. So I'm assuming there might be some knocking out of villains or murderers. I've forgotten my third knock. My fourth knock is fourth, which is now third, is Mount Vesuvius is like knocked life completely upside down. And I remember my third one,
Right.
which
Which is now fourth.
which is now fourth. The builder who is going to build stuff
Mhm.
is like knocking things into shape, knocking down things that are. So
No.
you have many knocks.
Yes, that is where I was going to go with this, and I've forgotten. But obviously, when they get to this this house, they have to start knocking down walls
Yeah.
and things like that. So yes,
You got 4 for the price
yeah,
of 1.
absolutely. And I'm just going to say one last thing.
Mhm.
On the wedding day, the husband gets struck by lightning.
Oh,
Yes.
the Flavia's husband.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
That seems a bit ominous.
Yes.
Especially because they believe in like gods and
Yes,
stuff.
absolutely. And they mention it quite a lot throughout the books,
Ah.
and sometimes in a jokey way and sometimes in a not jokey way. But
What's his name? Who's Zeus in Rome?
yes.
What was it Zeus? No,
No, it was
not Zeus. That's what I'm gonna call him.
yes.
Not strike me down. I've completely forgotten the Roman
Yes.
god. I can think of Juno,
Mhm.
which is his wife.
Mhm.
It's okay, the women are more important
No,
anyway.
absolutely. So,
But yes, okay.
Yeah.
So do we find out?
but it's quite interesting because obviously Flavia doesn't quite believe in all that kind of stuff because she's not from.
Does she believe in British gods?
She doesn't really believe in much, because of her childhood and things like that. Occasionally she will kind of mention some of the, the British kind of
Like cultural
foods
stuff
and
that
things
she
like
grew up
that.
with.
Yes, yes.
Honestly, if somebody I knew got struck by lightning, especially my husband, I would never let them or anybody else forget it.
No,
Because
absolutely
it would be
not.
so funny.
Yeah.
As long as we survive. It would be such a funny
Yeah.
thing to bring up.
But he has slight health issues after that, because he's been kind
Cursed by the gods.
Yes, but sometimes they do make fun of it, and it's quite nice that way. But
Oh.
yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're going to take a short break while I cough my lungs out. I've been resisting the
I can
temptation.
see the tears in your eyes while you're doing that.
We'll be back soon. All right, we are back. I think I have one lung left.
Excellent,
The
right?
other one's just gone and out. So I think I'll quickly talk about my second book, Buddha Da. I have complicated feelings about this book. So it's not like
You're not as
pure
passionate.
love, like reading lessons, just because it's not the kind of book I would have usually picked up. Literary fiction, like I was telling Jack about it. Like I can't, when I was reaching the end of it, I was like, oh, I can't wait to go back to like a good fantasy or children's book where they have adventures and it's not just about like adult problems and like marriage problems and things, which obviously like is also like a fantasy, I guess, for some. But it was a very interesting experience because first of all, like I say, I'll tell you what it was about, I suppose. So basically, Anne-Marie is the protagonist and she's, I think, about 12, I want to say 12, 13, young girl. So, and it's told through different perspectives. So one is Anne-Marie. Then is her father. So she talks about how her father has suddenly discovered Buddhism. Like he's like this Glaswegian sort of builder or painter, decorator. So very unlike the rest of the people that she's grown up with. It's set around, I want to say, like 80s, 90s, 1980s, 90s. So like a little while
It has
away.
been out for a long time.
Oh, has
so
it?
It wouldn't surprise me if.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. And it's like set like the other perspective is her father Jimmy, and he's talking about it from what he's getting out of it and how he's like it's kind of helping him in some ways and sort of hurting his life in some other ways because his family, like his wife especially, is like can't understand it at all. And they're like young-ish, they're in their 30s, mid-30s. They've like been together since they were teenagers or their early 20s, and like they have a teenage daughter. So those kinds of like suddenly like this person, he's like discovering Buddhism, which is, and they are like a good Catholic family and like who go to church and stuff, but now he wants to go to the Buddhist center and meditate, and like she can't understand it, and they're not really having conversations about it. So it's like interesting to see it from all these different perspectives. And it's all told in written in Glaswegian because that's who they are. And it was really interesting because I don't think I would have been able to read this book even like say 5 years ago. But now that I have like experience with like not even 5 years, I think the more sort of, especially that West Coast of Scotland kind of dialect I've encountered more here working in Coatbridge Library. than I do, because my partner, he is Scottish, but he doesn't speak in that dialect. I encountered it some in Glasgow when I'm out and about, but here I've actually got practice, so I know. Otherwise, I think I would have really struggled. I would be very curious to see how people who are not familiar with the language at all, how they get on with it, because it is a very specific dialect. And for me, it came really naturally now that I was like, oh, I've lived in Glasgow long enough. I don't know, like someone even not forget like from another country, even from like far off country, even like England, I don't know how much they'd get out of it. But anyway, so the book is just like, I think about a few months to a year in the life of this family. And it's a very kind of small, like it's not story about these big happenings. It's a very domestic kind of story, which is, it was really interesting to me to look at life from their perspective, because it's so different from mine. And the kinds of things they refer to, like it took me so long to figure out what they meant by getting the messages or going to the messages or something. Like I kept thinking post office, because I've never heard this, but through context clues I was like, oh, they mean like grocery shopping. So I was like, so I've not lived here that long, like not long enough. But it was really interesting in that sense, that the kinds of things they take for granted, it was almost like a glimpse into a neighbor's, say, like life or growing up or whatever. But like I say, I think I struggled with, I also, what I liked is the kind of relationship with religion, because he is like trying to figure things out and he can't really, but he's how uncomfortable it makes him like trying something new. Like his brother is also like, what is this? Because at some point then he stops drinking and then he stops eating meat, because like in Buddhism the people in his like vicinity are like outraged, like how can you not, like do we have to cook 2 dinners for you, as the wife demands, which fair, he should just make his own vegetarian stuff. But it's just like that kind of like small like sort of conflicts was really interesting. But I think like I struggle a lot with literary fiction anyway, because I think I'm used, like I read a lot of non-fiction, but I feel like that's like something based on my interest, or I'm learning something new, like horror for weenies. I was like learning something completely new about horror movies. And the other kinds of books I usually read are fantasy, some science fiction, or children's books, which also sometimes I'll read realistic fiction there. But even that, I guess, because it's written for children, it has more going on, like even if it's from different perspectives. Whereas this, I think I struggled because at the end of the day, it is only about these 3 people and their problems in life. It was really interesting to see the different elements. Like Anne-Marie gets really into music, and I really like this one point. So she makes a friend in her new school, who's Punjabi, Nisha, and they decide to enter into a music contest, and they bring together like some Catholic like mass kind of like music, the hymns that they sing there, with some Punjabi like singing there, and some Buddhist chanting as well, because she's inspired. So that, and they like are like sort of shortlisted into this contest. So like those little bits of like details were really like fun for me. But I think overall, I still continue to struggle with adult literary fiction, just because I feel like there's something missing in the books, and I want something more. That I think the itch is like fantasy or non-fiction or children's books scratch, which adult literary fiction doesn't quite get there. But I still really enjoyed having read it. It was a really fun experience to read in Glaswegian, and also like it was a very oddball book. So what have you heard about it in all these years?
I couldn't tell you anything about it.
Oh, right.
I would.
Okay.
But just I know that it's always, one of these books that it kind of goes through phases, that they'll be publishing like that. It seems like a different cover, and all of a sudden people want to come in, or they've moved here and they want to read something, and that kind of a thing. But it's always been about, and I might be totally exaggerating this, and it might be 5 years old, but it feels as if it's always been about, if you know what I mean. But I wouldn't know anything about it, and I'm going to ask you a question. So when you were talking about it to begin with, you were talking about how the big head honcho was coming over to find this child. do they find a child? Does the dad get involved in that?
So that was like just a brief kind of thing. So the head honcho doesn't come.
Oh, right, okay.
It's just these from the Buddhist center, like these monks go looking for, like they're local. So like instead of flying someone, they're just like, okay, you go. But the child is a girl. And they say that it can only be a boy, so it can't be. So, and Anne-Marie is very outraged because even though it's the 80s or 90s or whatever, she has like firm gender. She's like, why can't it be a girl? No, like, you believe in reincarnation, but not that it can be a girl. And then in the end, there is another baby that is due to be born. And he makes a joke about it, saying that, oh, maybe they miscalculated slightly and maybe this child, so it could be. But Buddhism was almost like background to it. Like it sort of led to a lot of the action, not action, but like the sort of the conflict.
You said action, it was like, but sword fights and things.
That might have made me more. But like if she just like, oh, you want me to cook 2 dinners, I challenge you to a duel, which would have been quite fun.
Yes.
But I think what, like for me, now that you were talking about how popular it's been, especially amongst like local people, if it would have been so like mind-blowing to read a book that could have been their lives. Because you're reading books that are either like from abroad or they're from England or they're a very specific kind of like middle class, upper middle class, like Agatha Christie or whatever life, or like olden times. Whereas this is like contemporary. Like I'm sure like things like this kind of life you could be able to recognize now. It's our everyday people. It's somebody that I would recognize. It's the kind of language and lifestyle and culture that I could recognize. It would have been so incredibly like moving, I'm sure, to a lot of people to recognize themselves in the book. So that would have been, I think, really cool for.
Would it make a good visual thing? I'm saying visual film.
Yes, I would say so.
I don't know if it has become one, but I think that would probably help with people that didn't know what messages are and things like that.
Yeah, I think I would really actually like to watch it as a movie, maybe, or like a limited TV series.
6 parts.
6 parts, yes, perfect. Like because I think that like it comes across here. She is a really good writer in terms of the relationships feel real. Like in that they don't like it feels like you're just looking into somebody's actual life because it's just like regular life with some drama, but it could no sword fights. But although Glasgow, it could they could very well have sword fights. But it feels like that. Like it feels really real. It feels like you're actually, and if you get invested in these people, you'd be like, I feel like visually it would be even more so because that personality which is present here would come more to life, I think, on screen. So I don't want to like sort of slag this book off because I did enjoy like sort of this new experience of like completely out of my comfort zone reading it, but I don't like I'm still not won over by the genre of literary fiction because it does seem to be people with marriage problems or like boring adult problems, not like like dragons and sword fights and elves or like just like adventure and action and drama. So I'm just not refined enough.
To be fair, I like everything apart from horror, but I tried this and didn't like it because it's written in Glaswegian. There's quite a few books out there now that are maybe written in like not Irish, but that kind of you hear the person's actual voice. And I struggle with that sometimes. Because I feel as if sometimes I have to. I mean, I know what messages are, but I think sometimes I would still struggle, with the whole sentence. If you know what I mean. So I've dipped into it a couple of times, and it's not my cup of tea for that reason.
Yeah, which I can understand it being a barrier for me. I think that was. I don't want to say my favorite part, but I really enjoyed the challenge of it and the sense of like accomplishment. And I do know, like, because at some point, like, I stopped noticing it and I just like kept reading it.
Maybe that's the problem. I've not given things like that enough time to get into it.
Yeah.
But I think I would watch it.
Yeah.
Because I think like that when you watch something like that, you're in there and you kind of
Yeah.
know there's visual hints to it, if you know what
Yes.
I mean.
And also the sort of umbrella plot of it is really interesting as well, about this Glaswegian man like getting into Buddhism and stuff. I don't know how Buddhists will feel about this and how like Buddhism has been used, because it is like a plot point. But it's like people trying to make sense of like each other and each other's like, you know, you're growing differently a little bit maybe. So it is very adult stuff, but it's done with an interesting, I think, twist to it.
Okay. I do like the cover. The covers that I've seen have not been as nice as
Oh,
that.
really? Okay.
No, that looks like a kind of classic cover, if that makes
It does.
sense. You know,
Yes.
it's not a penguin book as such, but it's got that kind of classic look about it.
And it's been I've just seen on the cover, it's been shortlisted for a bunch of awards
Oh,
and
very
prizes
cool.
and stuff. So yeah, must be doing something right for someone.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I've read another Anne Donovan book that
Okay.
wasn't written in that kind of voice, but I've been trying to think of it and I can't think what it is.
It must be difficult, or I don't know if you grow up speaking like that, it might just come really naturally to it's just a different language that you're writing in.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I grew up with like different languages as well. And like sometimes you mix like Hindi and Marathi into English. Like that's how I grew up speaking, which I don't. Well, I do with my partner because we live together, and he's learned. Now he's picked up on Hindi, and sometimes he'll like, once I think he was playing a video game and he like said this exclamation out loud, and he's like, "What have you done to me?" So it's like that kind of osmosis. But when I talk to like my Indian friends, like he notices that like my accent will change and like I'll put in a lot more words. So I guess that's the same for her, but in print. So like she's sharing it with the world, which is quite cool.
Now you started off that saying I don't have much to say about this book.
I did. Apparently I did. I have so much to say.
Well, I don't have too much to say because I don't want to do any spoilers
Okay.
for my doorstop of a book. And yes, there is a hummingbird, kingfisher, I think it actually is,
right.
on the top. So this is the third in the series of the Moonflower Murders, which are on television. They've been made into TV things. Anthony Horowitz does a bit of both, and he's very good at a bit of both. These books, the Moonflower books, are brilliant in my opinion because they're set now, but interweaved is a Golden Age crime book. So the hero of that is Atticus Pound. And he's kind of like
that's an excellent name.
Yes, it is. Kind of Poirot kind of a character, but not, if you know what I mean. And the books, I'll talk about the books, not the TV. Go watch TV, but I'll talk about the books. The books are in the main book. So the main character is called Susan Ryland. I've remembered that. I'm very impressed. And she is an editor. And she works with the author of these Atticus Pound books, and she loves them. She's not that keen on the author, Alan Conway. And in the first book, he is killed, and she gets involved in how that happened and who did it. But during that, she's also reading the book, the Atticus Pound book, and Alan Conway, when he was writing, took lots of influences from what was going on around him, and quite often in his books the characters were people he knew, and he was writing his anagrams and things like that, and he changes things, but basically in one of the books the murderer is the person who did the murder in real life, basically, and it's very, very clever. Anthony Horowitz is really good at kind of doing that, just kind of winding you in and getting you in that world. So this is book 3. Alan Conway's dead. She's no longer working for the editing firm that she was working before, the publisher she was working for. She was living in Greece with her boyfriend, but that's not quite worked out either. That's book 2. So she's back in London. She's kind of a bit lost. She's known for basically catching the murderer, who I'll not tell you who it is, but in the first book. And people don't really believe that that's right, even though the person has confessed and is in prison, and so they're a bit wary of her. So she's trying to find her feet basically, and she gets, she's been doing some freelance editing, and she's doing some kind of Nordic crime book at the moment, and then she gets a call from one of the people she's freelancing with, who says that they've got an author in who wants to do a continuation of the Atticus Pound books, which is a bit weird because in the very last one, Atticus is just told that he's basically, dying. He's, not going to be with us for much longer. But they kind of want to squeeze in another book, and they've got a very famous children's author's grandson who wanted to be an author, and it didn't quite happen, to follow on with the story. So she gets the first batch of notes kind of thing, and then you're in that story, you're in that story, and it's really, really cleverly done because you automatically, having read the other two, are looking for things that connect with what's happening in the real world.
So there's a book interspersed
Inside
in
the
all
book,
of them.
Yes. So in one of them, I think it's pretty much done all in one go, and
Okay.
the other two is kind of split up into, she's reading it, and then she has to stop because the doorbell goes, and she goes,
Oh, that's really interesting as a format.
and the story within the story is written like a slightly different font, it's slightly different thing, so that it's the story straight away, because sometimes you don't quite know, and then immediately when you go back to the real world. They're very, very cleverly done. There is rumours that this is going to be the last one. I hope it's not. I hope they go back to doing something else. I really enjoy the main character. She's about 55, and she loves books, and she loves helping authors to get to the end of that book. She's not shy at kind of telling them, this is going to work, this is not going to work, that kind of a thing. And in this book, you kind of feel her pain that she's not in that world anymore, and she's just kind of trying to find herself. As usual, there's other things happening. She's got a sister, and she knew Alan Conway, the original author, from other things, and there's all that going on in the background. But it's just, I love the way Anthony Horowitz does this. I love the way he, I would sit and read all the Pound books on their own without even having Susan reading them to me, because they're brilliant. And when you're in the Pound book, you're in 1955, you're in that world, and then you come back to the modern world and you're like, oh no, I'm enjoying this, and then you're back in there.
So do all the books within the books, they have like the whole plot given? So from start to end?
It's just like reading an Agatha Christie in the middle of reading something else, but the Agatha Christie is relevant to what's happening now. So, for example, in the first one,
interesting,
in fact, the second one, I think it is, the book itself is just a Pound book. It's really good, but there's something in it that indicates who did this murder 5 years ago, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Because Alan's he's not a nice person, and he does kind of, like, as I say, I think her sister's in one of the books, because he used to be a teacher, and she was there at the same time, and he makes her, he makes fun of her in it, but because he's changed the name and everything, you can't.
Right.
It's not until you sit down and realise who he's talking about. And this new author, Eliot, is trying to do something similar. His grandmother, who was a famous children's author, died at some point, and the story that he's written with Pound in it is almost like taking those things to 1955 in France, and there's hints that he knows who murdered his gran, although it's never been said that the gran was murdered. It's putting into Pound's story, if you know what I mean. It's like a mechanism of him being able to tell the world something without telling them something.
I also like that it probably gives you as a reader like hints and clues that you would be able to solve without her.
No, absolutely. And it's been done exceptionally well on television. But, I'm not the biggest fan of, it doesn't always work. And I wasn't sure at first, because I loved the first book so much. When they said they were going to make it on TV, I was like, how are you going to do that? Because there's a story within a story. They do it exceptionally well. Basically, you're now, and she'll be driving her car, and we'll get a shot from up here. You can't see that, sorry, from like sky. And she'll drive past like a small village, and then she'll drive out the village, but the camera will pan back to the village, and it's 1955 in that same village, because the both of them are kind of running side by side. It's exceptionally done.
It does sound like it would make for a fantastic.
And as I say, I think because he's involved in the TV and he's worked on many TV things before, he knows what he wants and knows what's what, if you know what I mean, what will work. So there are slight differences, obviously, because, you know, books are quite big and TV's not. But honestly, when you're watching on the screen and suddenly you're in 1955 and the characters are played by the same actors who are playing the similar characters now, it makes it interesting because you can't see that in the book, you know, but you can see it on the screen. It's just very well done.
So where does Moonflower come from? Moonflower Murders.
Moonflower Murders is the name of one of the Atticus Pound books.
I see.
And I'm pretty sure it is the first one, but it's the last book. So it's the first book in the Anthony Horowitz series, but it's the last book, and that's where we find out more about Alan. Is basically in the first book, somebody wants to call it the Moonflower Murders, and he says, he gets very angry and says no, it has to be Moonflower Murders, and it's because of his the way he's writing things and things like that. It needs to be in a certain order, and it's just became the Moonflower
as the
mysteries kind of a thing.
I mean, I suppose it does sound like it could have been a one-off, and then it got really popular, and he's writing more now. So even if this were the rumors are that this is the third, because I can imagine it would be really difficult to do as well, like as fun as the structure sounds, but to make the story engaging and the story within the story engaging and make it have it in conversation would be difficult. So maybe he needs a break and then he'll come back.
I think that's why he writes different things. So he also wrote one of my favourite Sherlock Holmes continuation things, and it's quite funny because in this story, you know, she doesn't like the fact it's a continuation. She's like, no, but he's done a couple of continuations. You know, Moriarty is just, I've talked about it on the podcast, a fantastic book.
He also writes for kids, I'm pretty sure.
He does, he's taken over a few James Bond stories as well. You know, he I think he mixes it up to keep himself fresh, and I think you can see that, you know, that he jumps from thing to thing. You know, this is now and 1955, and then you've got Sherlock Holmes in the Victorian times, and then you get James Bond, who's completely like, you know, and I think that's keeps him fresh, if you know what I mean, and it keeps us guessing.
Would you think that someone who this series is the first introduction to Anthony Horowitz would want to go and explore his other?
I would hope so. The first one I read, I think, was Moriarty, and I definitely wanted to read more. And if he had just kept writing Sherlock Holmes books, I would have been quite happy. But he writes other things. He also writes,
and he's been writing for
many years. He also writes a series of books, the Detective Hawthorne books, which are now, and he is a character. He's the main character in it. There's a part of me that doesn't want to know the answer to this, whether it's true or whether he's just kind of, you know,
it's an in-joke.
Yes. But they're really good books as well. And Hawthorne, again, as a detective, is completely different than Sherlock Holmes. He's completely different than Atticus Pound. You know, he's just different. And I like the fact he puts himself in the story. You know, he is there. He is Anthony. He talks about his wife. He talks about having to go and, you know, see the publishers on Tuesday because his new book's due out, you know. And then you've got these ones. It's just so different. I think there's something for everybody.
Okay, so even if this is not your cup of tea, you can go with the vast range of Anthony Horowitz books and
I think, you know, I know folk that are just reading the children's books and absolutely love them. You know, adults, but they're reading the children's books. So.
I know there's some like spy ones, I know one. There's some actiony, some little murdery, horror-y kinds of things. So yeah, he does seem to have a wide range.
He does, yes.
Well, I need to go and cough my other lung out, as you can see. What about for next time? How shall we prepare?
So next time, we would like us to look at faraway places.
Okay. Is this in preparation for summer?
I think so.
Or maybe just escape?
Escape. But faraway places she would like. And a couple of weeks ago, we would be quite happy staying where we are. It was glorious. And now we're in like monsoon, March winds.
We're very in Scottish weather. As like, yes, as I keep being reminded, you
Yes.
don't, very unpredictable.
Yes.
But maybe in a couple of years, a couple of
years.
hopefully not, couple of weeks, maybe we'll be back to glorious weather.
They do say the sun is coming back.
Oh, we've jinxed it.
Yes.
Well,
Sorry.
I'm going to see what faraway places I want to read about, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.